I'm going to be playing the career of Lando Norris over 3 entire seasons. However, I'm going to be starting with a new team and a slower team in which we'll be trying to achieve a world championship by the end of it and to take the title of the biggest bottle job away from Lando. For the first race of Lando Norris's career started really well as he managed to beat Sainz, his teammate at Williams, in qualifying by only a few thousandths of a second. In the race, it was an even better result for Lando as he had a solid start, getting into third position and holding on to it for the entirety of the Grand Prix to actually claim his first podium in just his first race. But in order for Lando to get a call up from a top team this season, he is first going to have to continue to beat his teammate in the head-to-head to really show himself in the paddock. Lando's success in the sport didn't just finish at the first race, it continued for the first half of the season, as only into Lando's third race weekend and a little luck with the weather claimed his first win at the home of Ferrari, and this traction in the paddock actually intrigued Ferrari and approached Lando for signing him next season, but only under these requirements. Fred Vasseur stated they are interested, but seeing they have two of the best drivers on the grid, it won't be easy to get in, as they want Lando to finish in front of at least one of the drivers in the standings by the end of the season to get a seat. And Lando took this requirement very personal as this success carried on, gathering another win at the next round at Canada, creating a 16-point gap. Lando won't even need Ferrari at this rate. But of course, this didn't carry on as the next race resulted in contact with Albon after leading, reducing the gap to only 3 points in the end. As the season went on, the car's performance did start to show a little more, as well as Lando's performances weren't too great. He managed to have some decent races and some luck with Ferrari and Leclerc having some engine failures, which meant for the penultimate race, Lando was only just 8 points off the top and a gap of 10 points between both Ferrari drivers. The penultimate race at Qatar was a load more of luck as the championship rivals had penalties and was starting the main race down the order whilst Lando was on pole position. Lando did have a good start and led for most of it, however, on the last lap, Max did overtake him for the win, but the championship still wasn't over as he gained a massive number of points on the front runners. The championship was between 5 drivers, with the top 4 only separated by 4 points and Leclerc 19 points off in 5th. This was probably the closest championship I'd ever seen, and in qualifying it was really close again, with Lando in 2nd, only 100th off Russell on pole and the rest down the order. The race, it was a good start as Russell went on the alternative strategy, which was a bit of a risk for him, and Lando was all over the back of him for the first stint, but as Lando got to the pit window and as he boxed, unfortunately it was a slow stop, which resulted in Lando coming out 5 seconds off Russell and into the reaches of Max. The race from then on was over, and in the end Russell claimed his first world championship by only 3 points. Although Lando did just miss out on a great chance of winning a championship, he did however claim a seat with Ferrari for next season, who did just win the Constructors, as he eventually did beat Leclerc in the standings and also Sainz in the head-to-head. But coming into season 2, Lando did partner Charles Leclerc, interestingly, as Max did finish ahead of him last season, so Ferrari does seem to have a soft spot for Leclerc, but he did also have an engine failure which might have played a part. But Max did go to Williams to replace us, and the biggest news was somehow Lance Stroll being let go by Aston Martin and leaving the sport. I didn't actually think this was actually coded into the game. As well, Alonso retired, meaning they had an all-new driver lineup. However, before the season started, Lando did have some new conditions in his contract, which if he didn't meet would mean he would be getting the boot from Ferrari at the end of the season. The requirement was to at least get in the top 2 in the standings and help the team towards another Constructors title, which would be one hell of an ask seeing Ferrari didn't have the outright best car on the grid. But eventually the season did start at Australia, and Lando did show some promise as well for Ferrari as they locked out the front row in qualifying, however with a bit of a gap to Leclerc, over 3/10 behind. After a good start and actually taking the lead from Leclerc, however this is when things started to get a bit fishy as the team wanted Lando to give the position back and stop fighting Leclerc, which is now starting to make a lot of sense why Max did leave last season. Lando did give the position back and abide by the team orders, but a late safety car from Max retiring meant Lando actually came back out in front after the pitch, which was a bit awkward. However, Charles did re-overtake him and Lando had to hold on to take P2 from UK at the line. Not only are the contract requirements very challenging and possibly detrimental to Lando's career, the team is also favouring Charles over him. It might be a complete waste even staying at this team, but Lando did use this frustration at the next few races and took a win at Bahrain way ahead of Leclerc, but a stinker at Ferrari's home race, Imola, in which the team wasn't too happy about. Lando did eventually redeem himself at Canada and Austria, winning both races, which meant coming into the halfway point he had a 17-point gap over Leclerc after a poor 2 weekends from him. The team was comfortably ahead in the constructors, which was good, but Lando needed to continue this form in order to try switch the team's mind on who should be the number one and to achieve the top 2 finish for this season. But as the season went on, Lando did fall into a slump after a poor few weekends at Silverstone, Hungary and Mexico, which sent the championship swinging in the complete opposite way towards Charles, being 22 points now behind. But despite the lack of inconsistency, no team was a real standout for this season, and Ferrari actually won the constructors 3 races before the end due to other teams taking points off each other. So at least one part of the contract was done. Lando just needed that top 2 finish and to go for the championship. We eventually got to Qatar, the second to last race, and a turning point in the championship and Lando's career as well, because the guy chasing us down for third, which was Max, had a rather terrible weekend due to a penalty, and the same for Leclerc, finishing out of the points whilst Lando took a P3, his first podium since the halfway point in the season, to now reduce the gap to only 4 points for the final race, as well put Max out of reach for second, which means Lando sealed his contract for next season with the team. But of course there was a regulation change which might not make it so easy, but let's put all our focus for the final race. It was now Abu Dhabi and qualifying, in which Lando had the advantage to start P3 whilst Leclerc was in P7. Lando got off to an okay start but was overtaken by Russell, and later, after a stupid battle with him, Lando received damage to the floor which resulted in performance loss. The race still wasn't over and Lando still gave it everything he had until Leclerc eventually did approach and, like Russell, smashed into the side of his car, once again resulting in further damage. You might see it as unintentional, but a very cheeky from Charles. Lando continued to hang on into the dying stages, but as he got to the final lap and the points difference still not being enough, Leclerc did overtake him and lifted the World Championship over him. It was once again a gut-wrenching moment like last season, and no fault to Lando, but external problems having effect. He did get the contract for next season, but at what cost if he can't win the championship? Can Lando give it his all one final time and remove the title of being a bottle job? And for the final season, and starting with the new regulations, the car unfortunately was a bit of a disaster and was way down the order. We have just got to hope it's better on track and we can develop much further if we are to have a chance of winning the championship. Driver moves for the season, and it was somehow the return of the notorious Lance Stroll and legend to come back and join Sauber. I have no idea how this guy keeps getting seats. As well, we had Max Verstappen leaving F1, in which Ocon replaced him at Williams. And though on paper the car didn't look so great, however on track it did have some promise but wasn't amazing. Lando started P4 for the first race, and from a race-long battle with Russell, Lando somehow managed to get the win and hauled off, which boded really well for the season. And it was the same at Bahrain, with this time unfortunately Russell coming out on top, but the car didn't seem too bad for this season, whilst at the same time Leclerc initially was struggling massively with this car. At Canada, it was a very interesting race, as it was the first time Leclerc actually had some pace and started second whilst Lando was down in 5th. The start was decent and was a fight between the top 4. Lando eventually got to 3rd and later pit Piastri in the pits for 2nd, which meant it was only Charles in front of him. Lando eventually did get closer and overtook Leclerc quite easily in the final stages of the race, but not realising it was down to a slow puncture for Charles and pretty much ending his race after that. Lando was leading the championship with a 13-point gap and with 2 wins to his name, which looked decent if he was to win the championship. However, as usual, the mid-season slump happened once again and the car still wasn't great. A risky strategy at Silverstone in the rain lost Lando a load of points, whilst at Zandvoort a DNF into the wall after getting into the gravel, and later having a pretty mid-race at Ferrari's home race of Monza. Lando was still leading the championship over Sainz after this, and the car was starting to develop better, but it just needed to be consistent until the end. At the same time, Leclerc started to create a comeback in the championship, winning 2 races later into the season, which was a bit concerning. However, a decent race from Lando at Qatar, finishing P2, and both title contenders finishing down the order meant coming into Abu Dhabi, the gap was 17 points to Charles, and Sainz was now out of the championship, but it was a healthy lead, and all he needed to really do was just finish in the points. The weekend was a bit shaky initially, and in qualifying Leclerc was leading and had a provisional pole, but as though it seemed Leclerc was going to start in first, Lando in the dying stages pulled together a mighty lap to put it on pole by just 5 thousandths of a second over Charles, really showing he can perform when it matters. As the race started and as both Ferraris led the way, coming into the first few corners, Lando got his elbows out and kept a hold of P1. It was a hard fight with Charles and Lando didn't need to take any risk, but the last lap eventually came and a late resurgence and overtake from Leclerc, but a great defense from Lando meant he cemented first position and later crossed the line to become a Formula 1 world champion. A dream come true in what was a career of very close fights over the seasons, but in the 3rd season, Lando did lift the championship trophy and now wasn't a bottle job no more.